First and foremost, I wanted to make the point that from a civil servant perspective, we would largely like to look at sustainability in its most inclusive sense, in the idea that sustainability is also about the sustainability of growth opportunities and the sustainability of opportunities for our hugely disparate country to have opportunities for every single one of our citizens to achieve developed status, to improve their lot, to improve the quality of life, or as our Prime Minister says, to improve both the quality of living, or as he calls it, the ease of living. For me, I think I'd like to begin from the point that sustainability for us in India begins with the idea that democracy is the central core of sustainability in the Indian experiment. What do I mean by that? If you look at history, really, there is really no other democracy in the world that began in conditions of absolute poverty and yet insisted on democracy for all from the get-go. In 1947, as we euphemistically put it, when the British left, the idea was that democracy would be offered to every single citizen as a means of participation in the governance of the country. At that point of time, 90% of the country, of 340 odd million people, lived below the poverty line. Now, if you look at it from a comparative perspective, there is no other democracy in the world, that began as an inclusive democracy for everybody in conditions of poverty. Democracy, democratic rights, the idea of inclusion of everybody was extended as prosperity increased over the years. The second point that I wanted to make is, just as a framing point, and of course I'm sure this is useful for discussion, is the idea that in sustainability in India is also based on the idea of trying and being an innovator in terms of governance. Why is that necessary? If, for those of you who are, of course, of Indian origin, you know this instinctively, in a country that is as diverse as India, it is next to impossible to have single unitary solutions for everything. And so we have consistently innovated with the idea that growth can only be sustainable if we try and tease out local variations on governance themes. And therefore, we have always been an innovator when it comes to the application of governance schemes and mechanisms. Third, technology. In particular, in the last several years, the idea of leveraging digital goods, digital public infrastructure, as a means of delivering on growth and in delivering on inclusion, this has been a signal basis on which we have sought to create sustainable growth. If you look at the Aadhaar or foundation, which is really also the foundation of the digital stack that underpins India's public digital infrastructure, it isn't just the fact that you have 1.4 billion people, pretty much each one of them having an Aadhaar card. It is also that it has been used as the basis for the provision, the more accurate, the more targeted, and the less leaky, for want of a better word, provision of social net systems to our people. What that has essentially meant is an increase in the number of people who are banked. In other words, a huge net reduction of the unbanked, from something like 50-odd% of the population to 80% of the population now having bank accounts. It has meant turbocharging the opportunity to leverage the digital system for the transmission of goods and services, which means something like 117 billion transactions were recorded just in the year 2023, worth about $2 trillion. It has also meant that inclusion allows people to come into the modern economic system without major stages of transition. So what it essentially means is that the quality of citizenship can be improved by using digital governance technologies. This also includes the use of digital governance mechanisms for reduction of transaction layers in governance, and of course, to partner the rollout of hard infrastructure through the rollout of soft or IT infrastructure. The scale at which this has been done, I'm sure, will be described by the participants here. But I did want to make the point that all of this is being done in the sense while rolling out in an increasingly changing political ecosystem, global political ecosystem, the idea that inclusion and sustainable growth must be generated while building it. To give you an analogy, it's kind of like trying to fix a plane while flying it. What this means is we are not only building new infrastructure, but we're also retrofitting old infrastructure to make it more environmentally friendly. And not to put too fine a point on it, this is a hugely complex task. So what does that mean in operational terms? It means while extending the effort to provide electrification across the country, 100% of the countries, 98%, 99% of all rural areas now have access to electricity. We now have to work to increase or meet our commitments, which we've met in the first case of 40% of our power generation coming from renewable sources, 8 years ahead of schedule. We now need to step that up to 50% by the end of this decade, which will mean a significant uptake in transmission systems, distribution systems, but also in power generation systems that will be both expensive, but also new technology. And it has to be made affordable so people actually adopt those means of power. It means the railway system, for instance, 70,000 odd kilometers of it is now being retrofitted to be electrified. In 15 states, something like 100% of the route length has already been electrified. A huge number of our railway stations are now running on solar. The equivalent just of the railway station transition to solar power, to give you an example, is the equivalent of 7.5 thermal power stations being taken out of the grid in terms of green power coming in. The new build of airports also includes innovative ways. Cochin Airport is a case in point of using renewable energy as a means of bringing green solutions to our new airport build out. So what I'm trying to suggest here, essentially, to summarize, is that what we need to look at when we look at sustainable growth in India is the idea of sustainability in the round, as it were, which is how do you ensure that growth that needs to be delivered to all of India's 1.4 billion people is done in a way that encourages consistent, sustained growth, but also consistent transitions towards more viable, more long-term renewable strategies, whether it is in transportation systems, power systems, home cooking systems, or indeed even in consumption patterns. All of this is going to be hugely challenging, and all of this needs understanding of the complexities of India's transition in the round.